Please put your hands together for Mr. Manosh De. Welcome. Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. This is the final session. Make the most noise. Put your hands together. Show us how much we're taking away from OAC 2019. Good evening. Welcome.
I've been given the graveyard shift after 2 days. Keep you guys still motivated to last till dinner time. My topic is, the way I see it right now after having seen through all the presentations, is hopefully a nice summary of everything that we've been talking about the last 2 days. And the flavor that I'm going to put onto it is that of what we do as urban planners and urban designers. A lot of subjects today have talked about it. But I wanted to kick it off first with a picture from the past. I grew up in a city called Calcutta. Today it's Kolkata. And you know, one of my first jobs once I finished architecture school was to actually fight people who would put up billboards on heritage homes. But today I'm here as a friend, so don't put that, hold that against me. I've structured the presentation quite simply for you. The first thing I want to talk about is the importance of cities, what's happening. Clearly, the Indian urbanization spread is also important for us, so we need to understand that in the context of what is happening here. A lot of the stuff that you've heard over the last 2 days highlights some of the challenges that we face on all sides. You know, it's not just as designers, but also people within the media, but also the challenges that governments face. But ultimately, it's all about the human experience, and we want to talk about that as well through the urban planning experience. And then I'll just sort of round it off with what kind of out-of-home elements there exist, and we can start looking at ideas of how these have been implemented elsewhere to see maybe examples of how they may be implemented here in India. All right, the first thing I want to bring up was how quickly cities around the world are forming and how quickly urbanization is taking place. If you look at the world map today, the level of urbanization is phenomenal. And most of the urbanization is taking place across certain zones of the world. Now, 20% of our population is expected to live in 600 cities already. But what's incredible is that these people have control over and provide sort of influence over 60% of the world's GDP. That's an incredible amount of power that cities have over the world economy. And this is not where it stops. As we move ahead, 68% of the world's population is going to start to migrate towards an urban population. And this means that there's going to be a lot more infrastructure that's going to be built. And governments are going to struggle to keep up with the pace of development, and they need assistance. Now, the kind of infrastructure that we're going to see being developed ranges from the basic networks that connect people, so whether it's roads, railways, airports, and seaports, to infrastructure that keeps people happy within cities themselves. Now, this is not going to be easy, of course, because as you're probably realizing, with the change of technology, people connect with each other in different ways. And growing urbanization means that out of home will become a prominent medium that brands use to connect and engage with the consumer. Now, India's share of this growth is also quite large. When I was in business school, my strategy professor would tell me there's only 2 things that you need to know about strategy: India and China. The amount of growth that's taking place in these 2 places means that the way that we think about servicing these populations as planners, as designers, is going to require a change in the way that we think. These traditions, these civilizations are older. They follow different norms, so how we treat cities within these spaces is going to be very different to the models that were used in the West. Now, as part of the growth plan that India has laid out, and some of this you've heard already, in 2015, there was a plan that was put in place by the Ministry of Transport that committed 83,000 kilometers of new road. Now, these roads are going to connect across all over India. And we know that the automotive industry is undergoing major change. You may not in the future have to drive, you will be driven. And if you are being driven by an autonomous vehicle, the amount of time that you will spend in your car looking out is going to increase phenomenally. How do we cater that or think about that in the way we think about outdoor? The government is also looking at increasing the number of airports. We already had these, a member from the Civil Aviation Ministry here today talking about the increase in passenger movement through airports that are going to be created in the country. Now, an airport is a captive space. There are people waiting, looking to go somewhere. So this creates opportunities in the way that you communicate, not only for brands that are in India looking to influence people coming from outside, but also brands outside that have the first window of opportunity of influencing people who are about to leave the country. So again, having 1 billion people in one place at one time across the whole year is actually a huge amount of responsibility that we have as designers. Now, a lot of these transformations that I'm talking about will take place at a much faster rate in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities than they will in Tier 1 cities. But having said that, all cities will go through transformation. And as I said earlier, governments are struggling to deliver on basic human needs. You know, whether it's power, water, clean water, I should say, transport modes that are green and safe. Urbanization is bringing a lot of challenges to governments within India. And I think all of the cities that we talk about will have to deal with principally 4 kinds of change. And the urban leaders that guide these developments will have to rethink the way they plan for cities. Climate change is a global phenomenon, and I'm glad to hear that we're already thinking about green approaches to outdoor. Infrastructure for cities that are growing rapidly means that they've in the past been additive, but we may need to rethink infrastructure delivery across the whole city, introducing IoT and other smart measures that actually change the networks that help a city function. And then, as we've been talking about as well, city well-being. How do we nurture and make people who are across all levels of diversity become more inclusive within the societies that we want to have? And then, of course, finally, we want our cities to look beautiful. These kinds of visual pollution that Raj talked about earlier are plaguing some of our cities, so there has to be a revamp in the way that all of this stuff gets created and designed. So how can urban planning and urban design help? Principally, urban planning and urban design work at 2 different levels. At the structural level, urban planning tries to bring order to the transportation networks, the infrastructure networks, the green space networks, but it does this keeping in mind a long-term horizon. You know, we're typically talking 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years in some case. Funding is going to be key. Planning projects is going to be fundamental to how those funds get disbursed. The urban designer looks at it slightly differently. His concern is form and design. So whether it's the built form, the buildings we occupy, or the public realm, these are the kind of spaces that urban designers try and influence in order to create places that have meaning and allow people to stay longer. And if you allow them to stay longer, if you allow them to dwell longer, you're able to influence the way that they think about the environment that they are in. So, from the perspective of the urban planner, we are trying to respond directly to the fact that people are spending more and more time outside. The way that the generations have changed, travel between place of work to place of residence to place of recreation is increasing. People spend more time outside, and even when they're outside, although they may be on a device, they're consuming media outside. And so cities need to rethink the way that they're planned and designed in order to offer places that are visually exciting and offer experiences, but those experiences are smart and customized to the people who use them. A city that does this well shows that it's willing to listen to its people, its customizing experience, and most importantly, that vitality inspires not just people from within that city, but also people outside so that they come and visit that city in order to contribute towards the growth of that city. And this allows prosperity and growth for everybody involved in the functioning of that city. Now, out-of-home advertising is the only medium that you can't turn off because it's always there. And what's interesting about it from a design perspective is that it can reach people based on where they are, irrespective of what their personal interests are. Sure, the engagement differs, but the way that you can target them is going to be more or less democratic. And this is why it becomes very important to start using data effectively in order to increase engagement and change behaviors. So what was quite interesting when I was looking at this topic earlier was how a supplier of street furniture, or rather, in fact, advertising, actually began the first move towards the use of outdoor in terms of building cities. This is a quote from J.C. Decaux, and it's quite interesting because the secretary mentioned this earlier. You've got a bus stop on a truck advertising a car. This is the delivery of the first advertisement bus stop that was done by J.C. Decaux in the city of Lyon in the 1960s. And what he was trying to respond to was quite interesting, and this is where he formed a partnership, and quite a successful one, if I might add, with local government. He was trying to solve 3 pain points. The first is to provide a service to the user. So context, very important. He was trying to provide the city leaders with a way of effectively managing infrastructure. So by taking this over, he was effectively saying, you don't have to worry about it, we will look after this. And the third thing that he did was he was giving the media houses an opportunity to start controlling the space. And by doing this, he was making a value statement. He was showing them that advertisement can have a vital role to play within the outdoors. So that's a very, very strong example of how successful J.C. Decaux is or was in terms of the way that it thought about outdoor space. And today, I think they control quite a number of channels across the outdoor space. Now, one of the areas that out-of-home and urban planning come together is in this sweet spot here where we have to think about the experiences that allow people to get completely immersed in the thing that they're looking at. But at the same time, it cannot be repetitive. That space needs to maintain a sense of dynamism because without it, you won't feel attracted to that space anymore. And the message that you want to send will fail. Ultimately, as planners and designers, we're all looking to support each other through funding, whether it's incentives for doing certain things or having the right price to do it. But of course, above all of this, in order for that whole experience to be complete, we cannot forget aesthetic. City icons are built around this. So, just summarizing some of the things that we heard today. City leaders want to have low cost but beneficial services. We heard that from the South Delhi experience. They are willing to provide infrastructure and space for infrastructure, but they want support in terms of the creation of icons and public spaces. Interestingly, that's exactly what society wants as well. So our role as OOH providers comes at this confluence point where we can start thinking about how we create PPPs in order to fund this basic set of items that constitutes urban infrastructure. But do it in a way that's creative and allows the city to become known. Now, there are some areas which I've highlighted here. I think some of the examples provided today and yesterday actually go into a lot more detail in the way that these particular items can be monetized or used for advertising. And I think some of the examples that we're going to provide show you examples of how other cities have done it. So whether it's something as mute and static as a zebra crossing, Mr. Clean used it to make a point in in an outdoor venue. Public services like buses, sponsored by advertising. So again, the whole maintenance of the street and of public transport becomes much, much easier because the cost is being shared. In Dubai, the metro stations are actually named by firms that have bought the naming rights. So your mental map of the city isn't by location, it's actually by the brand names that have bought space within that metro station. It's quite an unusual way to navigate the city, not by location, but by brand names. Solid waste disposal. Coke came out with an approach in terms of improving its CSR, and you can see the nice logo that they have, the recognizable, oops, it's missing there. There you go. The nice recognizable logo that they have actually creates a message at the end point, you know, recycle. And even the recycled bins, instead of being painted green, yellow, and red, are painted all red with distinctive signs. As we talked about earlier, the use of data and reactive advertising is also becoming quite popular in terms of our use of activating space. In this example, a camera screen captures the reactions of the audience that comes up, and a live Gordon Ramsay actually responds and indulges them and makes them perform tricks. So this kind of back and forth movement actually allows people to linger longer, and there are devices hidden within this that are actually counting, calculating, and are doing stuff to give people a measure of the metrics that they were otherwise missing for that space. So as urban planners, if we see a loss in footfall in some place, tricks like this can help us understand what we can do in order to increase footfall, what kind of retail we need to provide, what kind of urban spaces we need to adjust in order for people to start using and revitalizing that space again. OOH can also help maintain existing icons. This is something that was done in Sydney with the Aboriginal art, and it was a way to talk about an issue, spend time and give people the opportunity to think about something through a social message. But it doesn't have to be old icons. New icons too can be created with funding coming from advertising like this. The Alliance Arena in Munich, for example, is a purpose-built structure that is funded, and the whole surface is an advertising billboard. The colors indicate which teams are playing, it indicates scores, and of course, it provides key messages to people who are coming to the arena on that day. And then, of course, as we've been talking about, the way that cities maintain their neighborhoods, the distinctive lifestyles are all born about by advertising. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is a good example. All I'm saying is that advertising and out of home is very powerful. And they are able to create an impressionable mind, for an impressionable mind, a very strong sense of identity. And that identity is what city leaders are after. And if you can be associated with creating that identity, then the chances that your brand is seen favorably goes up much, much higher. Now, a very interesting exercise that was done in Abu Dhabi a few years ago in order to increase visitation towards the Louvre was the creation of the Highway Gallery. This gallery is actually a free gallery because obviously it's along the highway. But what was quite interesting was the way that they engaged the user. Every morning, a number of people take this 150-kilometer drive from Dubai up to Abu Dhabi to work. And on that particular event, what happened was, if they tuned into a particular radio station, stories about the art would be shared with them. This became an instant hit. Everybody was tuning in. CNN called it the first of its kind in the world. It was also described by Lonely Planet as saying, Abu Dhabi just became a lot more interesting. So it fulfilled its need to become known as a cultural city, a cultural icon. Because even after the Louvre had been built, there were not enough visitations to the area. So once again, outdoor is not just about selling a brand. As city engineers, we're quite interested in also how outdoor can be used to create a brand for the city itself. And you already saw a glimpse of this earlier. Outdoor isn't just something that has to be formal. What's nice about certain areas is the informal outdoor that takes place, whether it's graffiti or art. These are the kind of things that show other people that the city is alive and informal. Whilst countries like Singapore, and through the examples that we saw earlier in South Delhi, mean that they become quite regulated, rules and regulations prevent billboards from coming up everywhere. I think a little bit of informality in a city is always good. And some of these things can be done to promote brands, they can be done to promote the city itself, and of course the neighborhood. So I think these are the kind of things that we shouldn't forget when we're thinking about the role of outdoor and cities. So we've talked about a bunch of things, and now the question comes up of how do we then, as planners and people who are influencing government to write the right code, work together to come up with the right things that protect all sides. We've talked about already today how outdoor can be seen as a hazard, it causes distraction, it hides beautiful landscape or heritage and contemporary architecture. So we're not asking for outdoor to be put everywhere. So when we help governments write code, we need to make sure that the mapping of the city is done well, so that these lines of sight are maintained, so that everybody gets their equal space when people are using that area. The use of public data, it was talked about earlier today. We fight within the firm to help keep this data anonymized but aggregated so that insights can be derived, so that those people, civil societies or agencies that are fighting data privacy laws can be made to appreciate that there is a use and there is a way that this data can be used for their benefit. The other thing that we need to do, of course, is thinking about how much space is available to us, is be selective and avoid over-commercialization of public space. Those two images on the side demonstrate how, when people are looking, they only have a line of sight that is of a particular degree and angle. And that as distance increases, the ability to discern a particular object diminishes. So these are important tools that we as urban planners use in order to come up with techniques and locations that are suitable for effective outdoor media. And then all of this done in unison, of course, will help maintain and create a unique identity for the city. So this is a map that was produced in Dubai. The way that they produced this was a lot of people were given devices, and those routes that were most driven around were mapped. The time spent along those routes was documented so that these sites for outdoor could be auctioned to media houses. And the color codes indicate which media house owns them. And as you can see, it's across only certain primary routes. At the moment, I don't think India or any city in India has an inventory like this that's held by one central body. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to start thinking about in order to show the relevance of outdoor media and its effectiveness in the way that cities can be planned. And of course, when people are purchasing the media, they know exactly that this kind of tool helps them buy in the right place for the kind of brand that they're trying to push out. All right, and with that, hopefully we're able to summarize how we can convert our bland landscapes into brandscapes. As I said, we don't want to over-commercialize the city, but at the same time, we need to recognize that as we move towards urbanization and the number of cities grow, it's cities that are competing with each other. And the way that city leaders need to function is they need to rely on designers, media houses, buyers to help promote themselves in the right way. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was our final session, but not our final Q&A. Another check coming out to you to help us do that. We've got Mr. Luthra joining us on stage once again. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, with the iPad and the many questions, Mr. Shailendra Luthra, Director, Bright Neon Science. He joins us on stage, our final 3 questions, and we're going to request Mr. Manosh De to please be brief.
Well, again, the number of questions are 50. And to choose 3 of them is, again, injustice on my part. But That is the format. The first question is from Tasneem from Madison. The question says, the developed or metro cities in India are not really planned cities with adequate infrastructure. How could this problem be solved, keeping in mind the projected migrations and further lack of resources for everyone?
Yeah, I think this is a question that we've struggled with ourselves as a practicing office within the country. The biggest challenge that we have right now is the fact that our infrastructure and our maps are not kept up to date. So we really don't know what kind of infrastructure the city has and what is the carrying capacity of the city when it comes to a population. Some of the stuff that we've been doing, we've been working on the DMIC corridor, and what we've been doing is building databases, GIS databases for the government in order to start giving them a first look into seeing what exactly the population capacity could be for these new cities. But as far as the older cities is concerned, until a thorough mapping is done, unfortunately, this problem is going to continue, and the urban quality that we provide to people is not going to improve significantly over time.
The second question is from Disha from Rapo. The question says, since most big players have shifted spend to rural, by when do you think OOH will help rural transformation also, given that most of our TG is in smaller markets and digitization is a major challenge?
Gosh, this is an interesting question. I don't think that there is a right answer necessarily to this. I think, as we've been discussing over the last 2 days, the definition of out of home is quite broad, and there's certainly elements of out of home that can be brought into the peri-urban and rural areas. So we're not necessarily talking about large billboards. We may be talking about say community kitchens or kiosks that bring social benefit as well as key messaging to people in rural areas in order for them to start appreciating products. I mean, the urban example of this is a pop-up experience that you often see come up in malls or in sort of pedestrianized streets over weekends, where brands bring in a concept, or city leaders will bring in a concept, and they get the consumer, in this case the citizen, to try it. So I think that may be one way of starting to testing what kind of out of home is appropriate for the rural locations and what works best for them, as well as start getting them educated in the use of how this media works, and more importantly, what benefits that they can get from the brand.
And the last question is Mr. Gaurav from Fence Advertisers. He says, how important is the role of civic bodies in transforming the OOH, which conforms to the need of urban planning? What should be done by media houses, clients, or IOAA to reach out to the authorities to make this shift, which is not only effective but economical and useful too?
This is another great question. It's a burning issue across most of the settled markets where the role of planning predominantly sits with the government. In Middle Eastern cities, that role sits with a consultant. The government is just a facilitator and looks at only the business side of things. But in India, it's quite different. I think the government still controls all aspects of delivering out of home, and therefore, and that's why the only way that you can start approaching this is through lobbying. I was quite heartened to see actually the work that was being done in South Delhi, because at least they understand the initial steps that they need to take through their processes in terms of making it and facilitating out of home to start influencing. But as I said, over time, some of the obvious truths, so whether it's controlling the number or the proliferation of billboards is not being controlled. And I think the issue here is that there are so many agencies that control so many different types of space within the city that it's hard to really understand who actually owns that space. You know, is the space in front of a building that's on a pavement the roads authority space? Is it because of a right that the homeowner has his space, you know, the ability to see outside? And I think these kind of things cause confusion in terms of where the legislation should begin, what kind of governance needs to step in, and what the rights and rules are that allow people to either buy that space or modify that space for the benefit of everybody concerned.
So you have to choose one of
Yeah.
them. If you wish, you can go through the questions.
No, I think I remember the questions. They're all very good questions, but I think I'll go with...
The first one was about the developed metro cities are not really planned. The second one was about the rural shift. And the third one was about the role of civic bodies and what the associations or media houses should be doing.
I think I'm going to go with the second question.
So second question. Second question was Disha from Rapo.
Congratulations, Disha from Rapo.
Thank you.